Should I start? Should I start?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our last seminar of 2023. So we are delighted to have Professor Jennifer Nedelsky with us today to discuss her new book, Part-Time for All, a Care Manifesto, which she has co-authored with Tom Malleson. So Jennifer is a professor at Osgood Hall Law School at York University. So in this remarkable book, she talks about contemporary challenges related to work and care, and explores how transforming societal norms and workplace structures can provide transformative solutions. And today we also have Meenakshi, Krishnan, and Shraddha Jain joining us as readers. So they will share their insights and comments on the book. So Meenakshi is a postgraduate researcher focusing on gendered and political economy, women's empowerment, and social protection, and also exploring the links between paid and unpaid care work. Gendered and Shraddha, on the other hand, is a doctoral scholar at the Center of Development Studies, working on women's paid and unpaid work, gender relations, care work, and employment. So we look forward to today's discussion on the book. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jennifer. So Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. When we wrote this book, we were thinking primarily about solutions that would work for rich countries. But we also feel strongly that the issues exist everywhere in the world. And so I'm very keen to hear in the conversation how much of what we propose as solutions looks feasible elsewhere in the world. So now I just want to begin with something from the preface to the book. One of the most important insights I got from having my children was the importance of routine physical caretaking for forming the basic bonds of connection. That initial insight broadened into a belief that physical caretaking is part of what roots us in the world and permits us to feel a connection with the material foundations of life, from the care the earth requires to respect for the labor that permits us to live as we do. The dominant culture in North America treats virtually all forms of physical caretaking with contempt. Until there is a shift in this basic stance, those who do the caretaking will be treated with contempt. They will be paid little and defined as unsuccessful. If caretaking were actually valued, there would be a revolution in the structure of society. So I wrote those sentences in 1998. Now, with Tom Malleson, I offer a path to that transformation. This book is about new norms that could restructure our lives so that everyone, no matter how important their work, experiences the joy and connection of caregiving, both physical and emotional. The norm would be that all who are able provide roughly 20 to 25 hours of unpaid care every week, an amount sufficient for them to acquire the knowledge and connection that care brings. The need to learn from care grounds our argument that everyone needs to do it. In addition, roughly 30 hours a week would be the upper norm for paid work. We think these profound changes could have vitally important impacts, ending the unsustainable stress on families and the gross inequality for those who provide care. It could ensure that high-level decision makers know something about care, and those who know something about care could become policymakers. Even if caregivers were respected and well compensated as they aren't now, as long as one group of people makes the policy in corporations and governments and a different group does the care, we will continue to have dangerously ignorant policymakers. Part-time for all could end the long-standing degradation of care and those who do it, as well as the policy distortions that flow from failing to recognize the value of care. As we were completing the book, the global pandemic struck. COVID-19 has made it brutally obvious that people cannot get their work done unless someone is available to provide care. There's no better time than now to pose the fundamental question: what happens to care when the demands of the workplace ignore the need for care? Getting people back to work as we knew it will not address this vital question. Work relies on care, but care is becoming unsustainable because of the structure of work and the ongoing failure to value care. Who's supposed to provide care for those who need it when the ideal worker is still someone whose top priority is work? Better publicly funded care for children, the elderly, people with disabilities is urgently needed, but that will not solve the underlying problems of workplace demands that are incompatible with care responsibilities and a pervasive degradation of care and those who do it. And it will not solve the problem of policymakers ignorant about care. This book presents the argument that the problems of care, its low status and its unequal distribution, cannot be fixed without changing the structure of work. By reducing work hours across the board, with no exceptions for important jobs at the top, individuals, families, and societies will reap the benefits of a revaluation of care and a population, all of whom has learned the joys, the skills, and the dispositions of care by doing it. So now I'll turn to a summary of the book. Although there are many issues confronting contemporary societies, our book is focused on 4 specific but interlocking problems. The first is that of stressed families. In other words, the unsustainable structure of work and family life that puts enormous stress on families and forces many people, particularly women, into untenable choices between work and family. Bridget Schulte, an American journalist, has poignantly described the widespread feeling of this stress as being constantly overwhelmed, of always doing more than one thing at a time, of being always behind and always late. A second major problem is that of inequality. The provision of care is organized along hierarchical lines. The most obvious category around which care is organized is gender. But today it's increasingly obvious that gender intersects with other categories such as race, class, and citizenship status. In contrast, those on the top, rich white men, do very little care. The key point is that as long as care work remains stigmatized, as long as powerful men do very little of it and poor women do the bulk of it, society will continue to be profoundly unequal in terms of status and economic well-being. I often say to classes and lectures that even if you don't care about feminism, you don't care about families, you don't care about gender equality, you can't have any kind of equality. You cannot achieve an equal society as long as care is organized around inequality. A third problem is what we refer to as the care policy divide. Those in top policy-making positions in both government and business are almost always people with very little experience of the demands, satisfactions, and importance of caregiving. This means that policymakers are, for the most part, ignorant of a core dimension of human life. This simply renders them unfit for the job. We should no more consider electing someone without substantial experience in caregiving to public office or appointing them CEO of a corporation than we would someone who had never held a job. Our claim is that knowledge of care is essential to good policymaking, and the necessary knowledge can only be acquired by doing a substantial amount of hands-on caregiving. The final problem, which intersects with all the above, is that of time scarcity. Across the OECD, 17% of men work over 50 hours per week. In Europe, the average woman in a couple with children works a massive 71 hours every week, if you include her unpaid care work. The roots of these 4 problems are clearly complex, but there are 2 fundamental causes. The first is the dominant norms of who is expected to do care and who gets a pass from this core human responsibility. The second is the economic system, which particularly in the neoliberal countries generates widespread economic insecurity. The only real path to economic security is becoming an ideal worker, someone willing to work full-time and who can displace family and care obligations to the margins of their life or onto the shoulders of others. Our book is aimed at the kind of fundamental change that could actually address these deep systemic problems at their roots. Our proposal is for part-time for all. In essence, our proposal is that we need a dramatic change in the dominant norms of who does care work. And second, we need a complementary set of changes to our workplaces in order to foster and facilitate a more equitable distribution of care. So let me say a few words about both sides of the proposal. We think that the heart of the solution must be new norms that everyone is responsible for providing care. Our proposal is that all capable adults should be expected to perform significant amounts of care work, no matter who you are or how important your work is, even if you're a preeminent surgeon, an all-star athlete, or a senior executive. Everyone should be doing substantial care. And likewise, everyone should work part-time, or what we would now call part-time, no more than 30 hours a week. Although we do allow for periods of intensity. So if you're a lawyer on a high-profile case that goes on for 3 months, those 3 months you may not be able to do anything else. Or if you're an aid worker going to an international earthquake zone, you may be away and can't take up your care responsibilities. But when you come back, you take that time and make it up for care. Our argument is that practically everyone is capable of learning how to provide decent quality care. And moreover, everyone needs to experience substantial amount of care work in order to reap the benefits that come from it. And I should say, it just came up recently, again, in a conversation I was having in Korea, this idea, well, maybe there should be, kind of like you might be conscripted into the army for 2 years or join the Peace Corps in the United States for 2 years. You could have 2 years of care. We don't accept that as a solution. You need to be doing care all your life. So the project is to radically change the norms of who does care, and mostly we expect people would encourage one another to resist the pressure of taking on more work and support and appreciate the care we do. While we support, we hope that it'll mostly take the form of support rather than shame, we do expect that if anyone were to announce their failure to meet these norms by, say, proudly saying their long hours of work that they do, or how they just are too important to take time for care, such a statement would generate the sort of concern, disapproval, embarrassment, pity, or unease that currently would arise if a competent adult male announced that he had never held a job. The concept of a workaholic, which is a term that is still used with pride in North America, would have the connotation of disease that it actually should have. As with current gender norms, people would feel some pressure to conform, but these are norms, not laws. There'd be no bureaucracy to define and measure care. No one would go to jail for working more than 30 hours or be fined for failing to change their fair share of diapers. On this model, the responsibility for care is lifelong. It doesn't follow the current arc of life stages, intense when children are young or parents are elderly. When those immediate needs recede, we expect people to join voluntary communities of care where they make long-term commitments to one another in neighborhoods, in faith groups, in soccer clubs, choirs, some moderately small group of people who make mutual commitments to share care. And I also want to say that we consider care for the earth an important part of this, and for similar reasons. We think it's essential to the well-being of life on the planet that everyone participates in care for the earth so they can experience the way the earth is a provider of care and generates a responsibility, a reciprocal responsibility to provide care back for the earth. We think that the climate change challenge is going to require very deep shifts in values. and revaluing care is an essential part of that shift. For part-time for all to be feasible, the central economic requirement is that everyone has access to good part-time jobs. By this, we mean jobs that are secure, flexible, and high quality. High quality meaning that they provide the pay and benefits that are proportional to what is now good full-time work. In particular, for part-time work to be attractive to people and not just a scary prospect, it needs to be reinforced by economic security. A core ingredient of our proposal is a living wage, defined as what one person and a child can live on comfortably for 30 hours a week. And a solution to the worldwide housing crisis would also be essential, but is outside the scope of our argument. Unfortunately, none of these things exist in the Anglo world. Nevertheless, the kind of economic structures that it requires are not at all utopian. Many of the elements already exist in various countries, particularly West and Northern Europe. For instance, in the Netherlands, a massive 47% of the labor force is engaged in part-time work. It's the world's first part-time economy, though the participation remains fairly highly gendered. Similarly, a number of countries show that it's completely feasible to provide robust economic security. In Denmark, a single mother working 30 hours per week on minimum wage would earn about 22,000 euros, whereas what she would need as a living wage is only about 14,000 euros. In sum, we argue that a society of part-time for all could viably be built on four main pillars: part-time work, flexibility, or what we prefer to call time sovereignty, economic security, and care-friendly policies. Such a society does not currently exist anywhere in the world. Yet we demonstrate that each and every one of these components do exist. We know that each pillar is feasible as it already exists in some form, and we see no reason why the pillars could not be combined. This is the essential realism of the project. We're not advocating institutions that are unknown or untried. If we can overcome the standard but very real political difficulties of electing care-friendly governments into office, part-time for all is an entirely practical project. It's institutionally sound, economically affordable, ecologically sustainable, and capable of withstanding the pressures of globalization. So now I just want to close with some remarks raised first for me when I was giving this talk to a group of women lawyers. But I think that it affects all high status, long hours professions. It's really important to know that reasonable hours are possible. There's a mythology in law and actually in medical training as well, that somehow these long hours are essential to the nature of the job and to excellence. In the US, there are actually two very good books on how you can create a law firm with reasonable hours, despite the resistance of the profession generally. But it's not just working out the details of transforming these long hours into more jobs for fewer hours. We need something deeper, and that is to redefine the meaning of excellence. We need to break the powerful current nexus between long hours, success, and excellence. So we say that everyone needs to do care to learn from care. And one of the things that people learn from care is the capacity to take the perspectives of others. You can't care well for someone if you can't take their perspective. And that's why care teaches this vital human capacity, which is essential to judgment and indeed to the capacity to communicate in diverse communities, which is, of course, something increasingly important in not only our diverse but divided societies. Third, I should say, I want to highlight that the distinction between work and care is ultimately arbitrary. We have to use these distinctions of work and care, partly because they're so deeply embedded in the culture, but we need to use them in order to articulate this argument. But it's essential to realize that, of course, care involves work, and equally important, good work involves care. So throughout the professions, this is important for co-workers, including mentoring, for clients, and for oneself. The high status of many professions exacerbates a more general issue. Part of the way we're all trained to think that work is more important than care is that in our culture, the scope and scale of impact are in an inverse relationship with intimate relations and direct care. At present, Western societies code success as being as high up a hierarchy of power and impact as possible. And this almost always means doing little direct care. I think that this is part of why some people are resistant to the proposal of part-time for all, to some people at the top, I should say, to limit paid work to a maximum of 30 hours a week, and not to let even activism interfere with a core commitment of 22 hours a week of direct care. To them, I think it looks like too much important high-impact work or its excellence would be sacrificed to the low-impact, often slow, small-scale demands of care. And of course, I know that all over the world, the long hours of work are not only those of bankers and lawyers, but people who are doing multiple precarious jobs in order to survive, and those who are still looking for work. Nevertheless, I think it's important to remember that humans thrive best and learn what they need to know to support good values in their communities if they are regularly involved in both direct care and in activities at larger scales where they can feel their contribution on a wider scale. Under our current structures of work and degradation of care, people are forced into a choice. Part-time for all would go a long way to redress that. But it should also put us on a path to deeper change, one necessary to redress climate change and more generally for good governance. I believe we need an overarching change in stance toward life that connects these issues of scale, care, and relationship with the tasks of collective cooperation. Good collective decision-making is not likely to be fostered by a norm of tension and stress for those delegated to do this work, either in the daily form of carrying out policies or adjudicating disputes or deciding on the laws, policies, or norms to organize collective life. The dominant picture of the busy, important person in corporations, government, universities must give way to forms of human interaction that are slow enough, reflective enough, relationally connected enough to foster not only clear creative thinking, but a stance of care and compassion towards one's co-workers and towards those who will be affected by one's decisions. Part-time for all can be advocated for right now and will lead us in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It was really amazing and insightful. Now I would like to invite our readers, Meenakshi and Shraddha. Sorry, during my introduction, I forgot to mention that Meenakshi is a postgraduate researcher at the University of Development Studies, Institute of Development Studies. So sorry for that. And so readers can take 15 minutes each to offer their insights on the book. So then go ahead.
So shall I start, or Meenakshi would like to go first? Thank you. Good evening and good afternoon to everybody. And thanks, Professor Prabha, for making me part of this conversation. I'm extremely glad to read the book and learn from the same. I will go through what I found very useful to take the discussion forward, and also will point out a few things which I wish to discuss more through this forum. My discussion might be in the light of my research that is based in the context, which is very different from the one mentioned in the book, but inequalities related to who takes care of the care burden exist everywhere. So I think we can all discuss about it. The authors have highlighted the need for transformation in valuation of care and work. And we are also reading this book when Claudia Golden talked about greedy jobs that demand more hours and are more remunerative. She highlighted these are becoming flexible and women in the US have been able to reap benefits of the same. However, the critical question is about persistence of inequalities across and within the countries. Also, here we are discussing about flexible and part-time jobs for all, not only for women. Flexible work may not always be part-time. Although authors situate their discussion for high-income countries, but it is important to discuss the proposed framework as it is about valuation of work as such. Secondly, economies are highly heterogeneous. There is no one class of people in any economy. And also now labor relations are spread across countries, so no economy operates on its own. The book rightly highlights the hierarchies involved in the process of care provision and the ignorance of policymakers. Among several points, I find the discussion on learning to care, both for human life and for the earth, and economic security that is tied to citizenship and not to work status, very significant for the discussion. There are few points that I wish that to discuss here. First is about more importance given to unpaid work, including the voluntary care. This idea is also reflected when you describe care that is built on relationships. Although you rightly pointed towards the social hierarchies, but the decent wage movement is trying to address that. And somehow I felt that not bringing in paid care into the framework may hamper other efforts to value care. There are some micro level evidence that suggest the situation when opportunity cost of foregoing employment is high, people are willing to pay better wages, which in turn may be used by care providers to take care of their care burden, which brings me to the point of affordable universal daycares for all. Suzanne Himmelweit, an economist, has talked about these processes in her work on caring labor. There are also some experiences that voluntary care is also gendered. For instance, primary health care workers or early childhood scheme workers in India. They're highly burdened with so much responsibility and called voluntary workers. So I want to draw your attention towards what we call voluntary work, and it might also be exploitative to one gender. Next, I want to discuss the causality between policy and norms. It's a very interesting discussion in the book about the connection between policies and changes in norms. The authors have argued that change in norms might precede the change in policy. This could be far more complex. For example, you mentioned that change in norm is taking place in a way that Danish men are taking parental leaves. However, this was possible only because there was a policy of parental leaves that have come on some point of time, which could have resulted from a great political campaign. Then I also want to say that we can see part-time work for all and all kinds of part-time work as complementary to other movements that revalue care. In a previous book discussion in the same platform, Our Time Is Now by Selma James and others, we talked about wages of housework campaign. There was one interesting discussion in the book about campaigning for taking a weekend off. So these were all part of important parts of the movement all across. So we need to think of these smaller movements. Another example I want to quote here is state government of Karnataka in India declaring that they would set up daycares in rural areas for women who work in national employment schemes. So how we make our political campaigns is also crucial. This is where I want to draw your attention towards the role of state. You stated that policymakers are ignorant to care demands, but you also highlighted the critical role in tax systems and more importantly in ensuring the economic security. Therefore, for political feasibility of this framework, a political agenda is very crucial, which would be very contextual. About flexible work, you yourself noted that part-time work is increasing globally, but the work conditions are not so good. It is pertinent to discuss the nature of part-time work that is supported with living wage, but here how living wage is defined, like what components get into the determination of living wage, that's a very crucial aspect. And what work and economy is able to create. For example, there are already concerns with work conditions put forward to gig and platform workers. So we have so many examples of part-time flexible jobs. So we need to be careful of that. I also want to take another example, what C. Golden mentioned about flexible jobs. These are actually very high-end jobs. So if we speak of people who don't have that level of education, what kinds of jobs are created? And when we talk about flexibility, there is also a possibility of offshoring work to other countries with low employment rates. So who can afford to do part-time and who ultimately uh, gets to do part-time work in another country? We seriously need to rethink about valuation and reward to employees who put in over and above conventional 8 hours of work, and also what role employers have to play here, like we have talked about pressures at workplace, parental leaves, and the whole question of incentivizing part-time work and what kind of labor demand is generated. We also need to keep space for variation in how people think of good care and how they form their own aspirations. There would be parents who would prefer to look into each and every detail of their children's growing up, while some would prefer their children grow in peer groups in daycares and learn to be independent. Here I'm also drawing in from my own interviews with professional women who said that I want my child to grow in a daycare with other peer groups. So I am also referring here to your resistance to formal care in the economy and 22 hours of unpaid work. You provided an example of professional women who want to outsource elder care and don't want to have children. That's their way of how they aspire themselves. However, extremely crucial is to talk about learning to care, which may come through participation in voluntary care work by children in schools and colleges, and they need to learn to value material care. So that's a very interesting section when you talk about material care and the nurture and care that is usually referred to. Then to initiate discussion about men defining masculinity, which is not only dependent on full-time and long hours of paid work. So as I mentioned earlier, everyone needs to learn to care, to participate in material care as well. And there can be several frameworks which are equally valuable to choose from. And that can change over time. Some people might want to follow the framework you suggested for one part of their life and full-time work for other part of their life. And obviously such choice should not hamper their living conditions. I would stop here and would like to discuss these things further when we have this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shraddha, and thank you, Jennifer, for a really very interesting, engaging, and also bold and ambitious offering in your book, I would say. My own research is on employment-related policy, the Maternity Benefit Act in India. And so I examine a lot of these interlinks of work and care norms and what is defined as work and what is defined as care. So I was immediately struck when I received Prabha's email about your book. So thank you so much, for writing it. And I'll also link it to some of my research findings to see how that sits with you and what sense we can make on that. So again, congratulations and thank you. And I think what I want to say before I begin my comments also is to the importance of the care policy divide and how knowledge of care is essential for good policy making was a real aha moment for me, I think, because I think that is really something I have not found discussed very widely. The fact that policymakers cannot make good policy if they're not sensitive and empathic to the needs, and that cannot come without their own lived experience of offering care. So I think that was really something that stood out for me as significant and interesting. And I think I would in fact invite that there was not enough discussion on how we can make that happen. So your chapters on feasibility, again, engage with the whole part-time framework of work and care, but not so much of how do you get policymakers to, apart from their own caring roles. But I feel like there could be more work and discussion around that. In terms of my main comments, I'll sort of divide them along the institutional feasibility, economic feasibility, and sort of the norm shaping behaviors that you've discussed. And I think what stood out very strongly throughout the examples you've used was the importance of social democratic principles and social democracies like Nordic countries who've done very well in offering this kind of a part-time model. And a lot of the examples that you give rely quite heavily on their framework. And that reminded me to some of the work I'd read, of course, Esping Anderson's work in the 90s on the three worlds of welfare capitalism is very widely known. But the fact that the political economies of different countries are so unique in the way they engage with welfare states and these underlying principles which form the basis of choices. So whether it's a income security, whether it's a living wage, whether it's care-friendly policies, how gender equitable should care-friendly policies be, are less about being a rich country and more about being what is the underlying normative philosophy of that political economy. So a lot of my work has looked at examining the underlying normative paradigmatic ideas and what we call public philosophies, which the whole society sort of buys into. And I think you've picked on that when you say that the US is much further down the line in achieving any of these equitable norms, clearly because their public philosophies are so focused on individual achievement, wealth concentration, accumulation. So the question that I was left with is that when we have an impressive example of Nordic countries, how can we get all countries to embrace those social democratic principles that are not actually culturally emerging from their ethos or their public philosophies? Because without that underlying commitment to a social democratic or a redistribution ethos, I don't think many of the practical suggestions will get implemented. So I found that that needs a lot more work, and I was a bit hesitant to see how we could get as diverse countries as the US or even across the world to commit to similar socio-democratic principles as the Nordic framework. So that would be something I would like to hear a little more on. And the second aspect when dealing with rich countries that I picked on was the whole crisis of care in the global north has been supported through what we call global care chains, migration of workers from the rest of the South to these countries. And I don't think the same level of citizenship rights are being offered to those migrant workers, which means the kind of part-time or the kind of economic wage security or a living wage that rich countries do offer are not being extended to the migrant labor. Now, we know that in the global north, rich countries, they are aging societies. So clearly the labor supply is going to be fulfilled at some point through increasing migration. And how would we, even if we implemented these in rich countries, be able to offer this to migrants, and to what extent this would really be universal remains a little bit of an open question for me. So those were two comments I had from an institutional perspective. On the economic perspective, actually, I found that more than thinking of globalization as a potential barrier for this kind of a model, and you deal with it very effectively to, dispel notions that globalization would reduce the ability to offer part-time work. I actually find globalization means that we can expect that non-rich countries also actually embrace these kinds of norms. So Shraddha picked on some examples from India, and my research is also based there. So I will talk about India has now 26 weeks of paid maternity leave, which is one of the longest in the world, only comparable to Nordic countries. And we're way ahead, for example, than the US. Wage compensation for maternity and childcare has been part of the Right to Food campaign in India. But if you look at it in GDP, and of course, GDP terms, we have now, overtaken the UK, but per capita GDP and productivity, we would still be very low. So what I'm saying is that we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that only economic development could lead to these norm change. So I think it's absolutely great that we have this book to open a conversation across the global south countries also, that norm change behavior need not necessarily be tied to economic status of a country. It's a normative and a moral commitment. And when there is a moral commitment, then we will find the means to do it within the country framework. So I actually found that a universal acceptance of these norms would be a very powerful idea rather than limit them to the rich countries. On the actually norm shaping behaviors that you've mentioned, especially how caring masculinity could be promoted, or how, stunted men, you use that term, it really stands out and hits you very powerfully. I also wondered that there could be a potential risk of similar norms then applying to others. So for example, would women who are not fully into paid work be called stunted women if you're not balancing care and work? So I felt that the challenge with norm change is it's always there is some element of shaming and exclusion in order to make people conform to a norm. And I wondered what would be unintended consequences of the new norm that we should be cautious about. Like, how could it start creating new forms of discrimination or exclusion? So that was one. And the other was, why would rich people give up their privilege? That has been a question I've really, broken my head against for as many years of the PhD that I've been. How do you get people to really agree to give up their privilege? And appealing to their better nature, seems to me to definitely, I don't know how much we'll succeed. So for example, rich people, despite having material security, do not reduce their working hours. Clearly makes us wonder that would the larger population, even if they were given economic security, be content with providing more care? Because while care provides more relationship, connection, belonging, humans also have needs for achievement, power, status, esteem. And I'm not sure that providing care in the household or in the community would satisfy those needs. So we'd always have people sort of chasing after shiny objects, if that's a word to use. So I felt that it might be a bit too idealistic for us to feel that the relationship and connection and contentment that care offers would be universally embraced. And so we might end up having multiple norms operating at the same time, where not every society or every community or every family would transition effectively into a part-time for all. And that to me is a big risk again of making it a very effective proposition. So really those were some of my thoughts, but fascinating read and a lot of hard work. If I could just add one final question, was on why 33 hours of leisure. I tried to look everywhere in the book and I couldn't find a justification or an explanation of why the leisure hours are proposed to be a lot more even than the care and the work hours. So if you could throw some light on that, or maybe I missed something, so apologies, but I'd just be interested to hear how you arrived at that number.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll stop there, yeah.
Jennifer, do you want to respond to Shraddha and Meenakshi's comments before we open the floor for question answers?
Okay, I'll try to limit it so I can get in the other questions, but these were wonderful comments. And I think I'll try to say something briefly working back. So it's funny that you say why more leisure, 33 hours. I was just at a conversation at McGill in Montreal, and I said, why don't you talk about the importance of leisure? Leisure is hardly mentioned here. So, and he hadn't registered that the hours, he hadn't done the arithmetic, that the hours were actually greater for leisure. Though I do think it's a a missing part of the argument about how important leisure is. And somebody else had noted to me, well, 22 plus 30 is still 52 hours of commitment, and that's high from that perspective. So anyway, I think I should say more about leisure, but I want to now come to this really interesting. I wonder if I should write a separate article on this. The point about, power, achievement, and esteem, and that what care provides us is, connection and relationship. But I don't see why competence, skill, excellence at care couldn't come to be a source of esteem, achievement, and maybe even power. So I imagine, for example, right now, I find myself still doing this. You meet somebody you've never met before and you ask, oh, and what do you do? What you mean is, what is your paid work? And I envisioned that, suppose we met each other and said, oh, and who do you care for? That would just become, and then the way they would answer that, oh, well, I have my family and my grandparents, and then there are the neighbors down the street, and I also coach a soccer club, and that we could come to recognize and affirm in one another a recognition, the social basis of esteem, as being built as much around our care and our activism, say, both, as our paid work. So paid work would become just one. Now we have it in a ridiculously exalted role in our identities and our source of achievement, power, and esteem. But there's no natural reason why that should be the case. And I could imagine, so thinking about power, that you might think that would be the hardest one. But for people who are in a position of power, so government or corporation, if they're really, really knowledgeable about care and the way, transportation policies impact care and immigration policies impact care, if they show that skill in making those links between policy and this deep knowledge of care that they have, then they should rise in their decision-making status, right? So I want to resist this, kind of deeply intuitive sense, but of care as these kind of nice, soft things, but it could be a source of this esteem. Okay, so I'll just say one word, because I think this also goes back to something previously. So I do think there's a very complex link between norm change and policy. And I think you have to get it going at the norm change level before you're going to get some policy change. But then the policy change can bump up the norm change, as we see in the Nordic countries. And so I don't picture that it happens without the interaction with policy. But what I think is a mistake is to think that we should just focus all our attention on the policy. I think if you look, I have a few examples, the gender revolution, the same-sex revolution in North America, the drinking and driving. These are things driven by norm change. So drinking and driving is an interesting one because it was always illegal. It just was ignored by everyone. Socially, people left parties drunk and went out and drove home, and the cops did, but it was a norm change that then finally made that the existing law actually make a difference. So, and lastly, all around the world, all of you know this, millions of hours of unpaid care are extracted from women on the basis of norms alone. So we really should not underestimate the tremendous power of norms. And so then I'll just use that as the link to your question about, well, what if we recognize how powerful norms are, then shouldn't we turn our minds to the potential of exclusion of these new norms once they actually take over? And so here I want to go back to some of Shraddha's questions about, and I think you said a little bit about it too, my willingness to override individual preference, both for work and care. And that really is a kind of bedrock of this approach. And so why is it justified? And I think it is always helpful to remember that in the cultures that all of us inhabit, nobody says, well, you know, I don't plan to do any work in my adult life. It's really not my thing. I'm not well suited to it. I'm better at, you know, sports and some care and some theater. Nobody talks about work as a matter of preference. Well, some people like it, some people don't. Now, I shouldn't say nobody, because some of the libertarians who back the universal basic income, which I'm in favor of, part of their argument is work could finally become optional. And there would be people who say, nah, I'm just not, I don't choose to do that. But we don't live in that world yet. And so we should map onto the sense that we've all been raised with, well, everybody has an obligation to contribute. And so this goes to your question of what's the underlying norms, right? Everybody has an obligation to contribute. And that contribution should take both the forms of production, whether it's art or, you know, houses or books or whatever, and care for both the earth and for humans. That this is the normative framework. Everybody has an obligation to contribute, and we teach that to our children, and we teach them to care early on, not just to wonder about what job they'll have when they grow up. So I think I am really willing to say, to take as our underlying philosophy this sense of shared responsibility for both, to use your, both production and reproduction, right? We all do it. We all need it, and we all do it. And that it's not about preference. People get a tremendous range of choices of what kind of work you do and what kind of care. Okay, so and then I just want to talk a little bit about my resistance to formal care as a solution. Formal meaning state funded. And I think we will always need state-funded care, from hospitals to care for the elderly to childcare. But I don't picture it as being set up so that large numbers of people will have that as all they rely on for the care of their parents as they age, or the care of their children when they're young. It's part of a range of options, but it's never designed to be the exclusive option for anyone, almost anyone. So let me just say one more thing. One thing about the equalization of the burdens of care, which Shraddha began with. I really want to emphasize that we think of this book as about the benefits of care, as well as the burdens of care. That it's not just an inequality of the burdens, but there is oddly an inequality of the benefits. And this goes to the question of how do you get people to buy into this? I think from early on, I think one of the answers to that, at least in the countries I know a little bit about, North America, the rest of the Anglo world, Australia, a little bit UK, even Western Europe, there is a very high level of dissatisfaction with the quality of life, with the nature of work, with the stress between work and care. I think we want to tap into that dissatisfaction and persuade people that there's a real alternative. And as I was saying, as we were chatting before this formally began, I just gave a talk in Korea, and I think of their situation of the lowest birth rate in the world, young people not starting families, tremendously long hours, as a kind of picture of this is what happens if all of your emphasis is on work and just maximizing production, maximizing income, a society is literally unsustainable if you do that. And we've, prior to the women's movement, it looked like it was sustainable because the women, no matter what else, they would take care of the care. But now they have the option not to, and they're starting to just not do it. And then the society becomes unsustainable. So I really think that, of course, the people at the very top, they think they're going to be all right because they can always buy care. But this is a mistake, I think. They want to be cared for in their old age exclusively by paid help. Not that you can't have excellent care from paid help, but it's not what people want when they're dying, or not only. So I think there's some ignorance that's at work in the illusions and those at the high level about how everything is going to be okay because they have money. Okay, so I haven't touched on this, inviting policymakers into care. I hope I'll get a chance to get back to that. I'll just say one other thing about the living wage. So I define the living wage as what it would take for one person and a child to live comfortably. And of course, what that living wage is, how much it needs to be, will depend on how good the social services are. So one of the reasons we don't try to, in the book, stipulate, say, universal basic income or a vast increase in social services is that Tom and I had slightly different inclinations there. I was kind of on the universal basic income side, though he's come around a little bit on that because it's taken off. As you know, when we first started this 10 years ago, very few people were serious about universal basic income. And he thought strategically you get a lot more if you just lobby for better social services. And the higher the social services are, the lower the living wage has to be, right? If there's free transportation, healthcare, education, subsidized housing, then what any individual employer has to pay for a living wage is lower. But the reality is that politics will differ so much place to place that the path towards economic security is going to vary. And so we thought we're better off not trying to, pick just one path. So my last word is about competing movements that Shraddha mentions. So and I think that's a really helpful way you put it. Complementary movement, sorry, is actually how you put it. And I think that's a better way of thinking about it, that I was sort of focused on why the feminist North America, and I'll just speak for North America, the only thing feminism has been known for is the advocacy for universal daycare. And I just don't think that's an adequate solution. It's not gonna solve the problem of work family stress. It's not going to do anything about the care policy divide. It's just not an adequate solution, which doesn't mean that we won't always need some form of formal childcare as well, but it's not a solution. And wages for housework, for similar reasons, is not a solution. None of these things are solutions. But it doesn't mean that, especially in a transition, you might want a complementary mix of projects that would do something towards both expanding who does care and alleviating the burden. But almost all of these things, they're all about alleviating the burden. They're not really about bringing in a whole new sphere of people, that is, rich, white men, into the policy making, into the child care, into the, integrating care and policy. And until we manage that, we're going to be in trouble. Okay, I think that's all I'll say, and try to insert the rest of it into my response to other questions. Thank you so much for these really, really helpful comments.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So now we open the floor for questions, comments. If you have any, so you can just raise your hand or type it in. Yeah. Hi, Prabha. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer, again for a really excellent book, which is very thought-provoking. I guess I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, the kind of the feminist inspiration for your book, because clearly you just mentioned, wages for housework and universal daycare, all sort of related to strands, very important strands of feminist thinking. And it's very interesting, the turn to care is quite a remarkable shift we see in the feminist discourse, and it's been extraordinarily popular across various disciplines, including in economics. And I just wondered how you position yourself vis-a-vis other areas of feminist thinking, say, for example, social reproduction theory, which has some interesting analytical advantages to, say, a discourse of care, which has certain drawbacks because of its assumptions around, say, gender essentialism, or the fact that you can't actually. It's capacious in many ways. It may rely on a notion of community, which is actually quite exclusive. I mean, various issues, for example. Or maybe too focused on childcare, whereas actually there are various other forms of reproductive labor, especially the kind that Madhushri and I work on, on sex work or, egg donation or surrogacy, which are paid reproductive labor, but may not fit in so well into the framework of care. So that's just one question to request you to elaborate on your feminist project. The second question was about also the moment of the pandemic and the rise of many manifestos, so to speak. So I think this is a very productive moment for feminism around the world. But I guess in terms of in the policy space, clearly what has been striking has been the emergence of an interest in the care economy, or the purple economy, as it's been called by feminist economists. And as a way to kind of use the pandemic. And I think you don't talk, at least most of your book that I read, I couldn't find. I mean, you alluded to the question of degrowth when you talk about consumerism, but actually, the question of nothing more than that. So I'm just wondering how you think about the question of degrowth, and how you think about very important institutions such as the ILO and the UN focused on the care economy, and suggesting that, in fact, it's a much more superior way to recovery from the pandemic. It's better to invest in care rather than in, say, the construction economy or whatever. So that's one thing. And finally, because I mean, obviously your manifesto is quite ambitious, but you have a better sense of what you might want to prioritize out of this vast set of tools that you suggest. If there was a few that you might suggest, it would be really useful. That would actually shift the gears in a more powerful way. That would be useful. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll say a word about that trajectory here from the feminist approach to laws relations, which was my previous book, which I did not describe either as exclusively feminist or as part of care theory, though some people interpreted it that way. What I see as the link is that laws relations was really about insisting that human beings are never independent of one another. And the idea that autonomy, in English, in North America anyway, independence is the standard synonym for autonomy. And so that in some ways, the whole book is about why that's a mistake, that what enables actual autonomy is constructive relationships. And so in some ways, this care project, actual care, material care, is a way of bringing that into the structure of society, so that we all come to recognize our interdependence. We all recognize ourselves as in need of care and capable of giving care. And I think that just to link this for a moment to the issue of climate change, that I think, the kind of scientific work that has been going on has really emphasized over and over again our interdependence, right, with the whole ecosystem. We live in a world of interdependence. And I've come to like this idea that it may be that the science of interdependence will finally overcome the philosophy of individualism. That I see a real change, that when I wrote in 2000, the Laws Relations was published in 2011, I thought I needed to spend a lot of time persuading people that human beings are interdependent. I don't think I would have to do that in the same way anymore. I think there's a kind of recognition of the facts of our interdependence. And so then that puts the role of social reproduction, to use that language. And in some ways I do like the language, and in some ways I don't. As you said, there are disadvantages to the language of care, but these are mostly disadvantages I'm really interested in meeting head on. And saying, no, this is, yes, we have coded care to be feminized, to be degraded, but part of the project here is to reframe care, to revalue care. And so then you can't do that if you just, well, let's use a different language, because I want to revalue it. That is part of the project. And I think I really do. There was a moment when I thought, okay, now I'm really interested in redefining property, going back to my work on property, so that it legally builds in property and land includes a legal obligation to care for the land for future generations. So I thought, well, now I'm going to leave care behind. But actually, I don't think that's true at all. I think it's care for the earth, which is what we need in this shift in values that will make a serious response to climate change possible. So just to say a little bit about the care economy. So I definitely think that this move to say that the care economy is a better path towards getting out of a recession, and there's a lot of work done on it, but as I observe it, a lot of it comes from the UK. You say the ILO is involved. You don't hear as much about it in North America. It has a lesser presence, and I don't know whether actually European countries are doing anything serious about, or even the UK. Is doing something serious about taking that up when they think about where to invest in responding to, and maybe we're into another recession, and so that it should be on the horizon again. So I think that's all extremely important. And will have a spillover effect of helping people see the way in which the economy doesn't run without care. Right? If you want to fix the economy, you better have a functioning care sector, or the whole thing won't function. So that recognition of the real foundation of care is really important. Just one quick word about paid reproductive labor. I think it's just as most of the advocates say, it's better to think of that in the language of work, and providing the protections of work, and in most cases. But this leads me to one thing that I didn't get a chance to say before, which is that I think part of why this is all actually possible is that, one of the estimates is that about 40% of existing jobs now will be eliminated by technological innovation. And this makes people very anxious if you can't picture an economy that isn't about everybody working full time. But in fact, this transformation should help us see, the job is not to replace all those jobs with other full-time jobs. It's to take advantage of this to move to a part-time economy. So I think that's, I think that's the sort of positive side of what's happening right now, is that we can see that as an opportunity to move to a part-time economy.
Shraddha, you have raised your hand. Do you want to have a question?
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I just want to say a couple of things. And thank you, Professor Jennifer, for all your responses to our discussion. So I have done part of my research with really poor households, so who actually live in very precarious conditions with no proper water connections or no proper toilets. In that context, if I think of all this, the two key things. One is, in the current scenario, money buys you everything. So even if I really value care, even if I enjoy care, what care would mean to me if I have to provide a better living condition for my child? So how you value care, it's very, like I found in my research, very contextual, very subjective. Second part is, we somehow need to more discuss about the unwritten contract of marriages. Like, the marriages are the institutions which have no written binding. So in that scenario, money and your relationship in the marriage gives you a lot of power. So that is two thoughts I had in mind. Like when you spoke of what I can, like I enjoy, if I enjoy doing care. So like there is whole stream of economic models on separate spheres, who is suited for what and who enjoys that whole notions of altruism, and then care being attached to altruism. So those things are getting into my mind if you want to reflect something on that. I'm sorry, I have not put a very specific question, but these were the things that came from my reading and from my own work. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, those are important questions. So first of all, you know, for the very poor, what we need is more economic security. And in our model, we picture that for the people in the middle, the path towards part-time for all will be, this is really Tom's research, modeled on the French model of, you over, say, a 10-year period, workers trade an increase of wages for a decrease in hours. So they never, their wages never go down. Their hours go down and the wages stay stable, you know, taking inflation into account. So actually stable. And at the bottom, we picture what we're after is in countries like, well, all countries that have poor people at the bottom, which includes very rich countries like the US and even Canada. So that there we need a greater level of economic redistribution. And so the US, you know, is such an outlier here. And it's it's a real challenge for us as authors because, you know, the book is published in New York and we hope for a big American audience, but they don't even have maternity leave, you know. It's they are so far. And so, but I'll just take a moment of, because I think what is powerful in the US is a sense of community. Because so I was thinking about, somebody had mentioned earlier, you know, community can be exclusive, right? And there is an American, I'm an American by origin, there is a strong sense of community in small towns, in churches, the sense of need of mutual obligation. What they don't want is the state involved. There is such a powerful anti-state approach in the US. And anyway, but for the rest of the world, and of course Canada has way less than that. But now I want to go to this idea of the unwritten contract of marriage, because a flip way of putting that in terms of part-time for all is that I think if you take this argument about norms seriously, it involves an intrusion into family life. It involves redefining the unwritten contract of marriage. It says that everyone, just like we made sort of we recognize that you cannot prevent violence against women in the home if you continue to treat the home as some kind of private sanctuary into which the law cannot intrude, right? You can't do that. And so the home is a site of violence to both women and children. And that means the state cannot treat it as having privacy as a wall that prevents that. So in a similar way, I think we have to say that if we want a norm that everybody provides care, that means that what happens inside households, inside the intimate relations of marriage, becomes a matter of collective concern. Just like you want, and we still don't have, right, anywhere in the world, a full collective agreement that if you see a woman you think is getting hit, that you as the neighbor, you as the local traffic guard, you as the doctor, you as the teacher have an obligation to say something, or children, right? We still respect this privacy barrier, even with violence. But we're making inroads there. And I think similarly, we would expect that one of the things that would happen if these norms took hold is that kids would be talking about, oh, you know, that family down the block, the woman still does all the cooking and cleaning in that family. Isn't that strange? So that is a kind of social shaming, which isn't the primary way I would like to see these norms carried forward. But I'm trying to acknowledge that there will have to be a kind of redefinition of the unwritten contracts of marriage, right? The deal is not that the woman provides all the care, material and emotional. That's not what it's supposed to be. And that means that it's going to be monitored, looked at, commented on in the community, so that wall of privacy will be interfered with, as it has had to be around violence. So it's a kind of intrusion, but it's an intrusion that I think has to happen. And the way I like to frame it is anybody who thinks they just personally, privately selected those norms, those terms of the marriage contract, is under an illusion, right? These are shaped by public norms. We want those public norms to change. So it's not more or less norms shaping your private life. It's different norms shaping your private life. So.
Martha, you can go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Marta. I'm a union representative from Poland. I work in the legal team of my union, and thank you very much for organizing this discussion and also for this book. So what called my attention to this book and made me also want to participate in this discussion was the connection between care and shortening working time, which for us in our union has just been very, very important. And it's also what we've been focusing on. I'll try not to be chaotic, but maybe I'll just say that. So we're a kind of grassroots union. We have sections at Amazon warehouses. We mostly represent working class women. And so the problem here is working too much. So it's working 40 hours and overtime, and then going home and taking care of the kids and taking care of the older folks. And we've been observing that that working time has been increasing especially in places like Poland over the past 30 years with the transition to capitalisms. And while working hours have been increasing, the state has been receding in its care obligations. So as working time has been increasing and we've been spending more and more time at work, I mean, In Poland, we work on average 500 hours more than our neighbors in Germany. The state has been shutting down, just relinquishing care. It's responsibilities of organizing public care. So shutting down daycare centers, shutting down. There isn't really any care for older folks, and we've also been looking at the ban on abortion the same way, that it's a way of privatizing this service and forcing women to pay for it out of pocket and go to Germany, go to surrounding countries in order to receive abortion. So kind of dumping it on women, and I think this has been very connected in this 30 years of transition to capitalism, to free market economics. This more increase in working time and just dumping all the care responsibilities onto the shoulders of women. And so when you were speaking about autonomy, I think for us, autonomy would be for women the independence from work, the ability to be able to develop ourselves, to grow, to enjoy life without being connected to work. Everything surrounds work. And so the wage here is extremely important. And I'm glad that you presented this part of the book, which I haven't familiarized myself with the book yet, about decreasing working time without decreasing the wage. So this is crucial, that the wage remains at least the same, if not greater. And this would also be extremely important for men to be more involved in care work, especially when it comes to working class families, because in places like Poland, the men are often also out working in the West for long periods of time, truck driving or working in factories, and they're not home. Literally, they're absent because they go to the West in order to earn more wages. So I think the shortening of working time, increase or at least keeping wages without decreasing them, and then the state has to come in and take some of these care responsibilities. Like it can't all be dumped. Services like abortion, for example, if we see them as a care, as an aspect of care, also, we can't be responsible for these things ourselves. And the last part I just wanted to comment on was technology. That in our experiences, what we've been observing, especially at places like the logistics sector, is that when there's more robotics, this doesn't mean that there's fewer workers or fewer jobs for humans. It's the work is reorganized, and technology actually serves to extract more labor out of workers. So, for example, when Amazon sets up new warehouses here in Poland, and every time it sets up a new warehouse, the warehouse is more roboticized. So the very new warehouses that are very, very highly roboticized, they don't actually have fewer workers than the ones that are less roboticized. It's just the work is reorganized, and more labor is that the extraction of labor is more perfected. So, yeah.
Do you mean more intense? The extraction of labor is more intense.
Yeah, literally, the work intensity is greater. So, this can even be calculated in, for example, we have health and safety legal norms on the amount of energy that can be burnt during a working shift. And so we've been involved in this campaign involving Amazon, because Amazon goes over the legal norms on energy expenditure for the working shift. So workers end up burning, for example, twice the working shift in a single shift, twice the energy in a single shift, and technology is used to do this.
The human energy, you mean?
Yeah, expressed in kilojoules, in kilocalories burned during the working shift.
Interesting. Okay, thank you so much. I hope to be in touch, actually, because I'm so happy to hear about a union that is concerned with lowering working hours, because in North America, unions have never been at the forefront of gender equality or racial equality, I'm sorry to say, and they're so focused on their mission in life is to make sure everybody has a full-time job. And so they're not set up to be well disposed. Doesn't mean they couldn't be persuaded, but I do not think of the North American unions as my natural allies. in this project. But paying attention to these stories, where I assume something similar is happening in the United States too, because there are Amazon warehouses here, that technology can just become making working conditions even worse in terms of intensity. So to just say a little bit first about the autonomy and independence from work. So I do think, as I said earlier, that a guaranteed annual income it would be a tremendous assistance to this project, because it would finally, it's the only thing that could actually break the idea that everybody has to work literally or they're going to starve, unless there's some, obviously people with disabilities who can live at, on the edges of poverty with state support. But I think that we say that everyone should do some paid work. And I think the reason for that is a matter of kind of both that it's my sense that everybody is going to thrive best and learn what they need to know best if they do some of both things. If they feel like they're contributing at this larger scale level of paid work, whatever that is, and at the very micro, necessarily slow, detailed, intimate work of care. But it's at the level of democracy. I think we want all members of society to know something about what paid work is like, so that they can make sure that their politicians are responding to it appropriately. If you've never seen a factory, if you've never been in a factory, which is of course true for many lawyers and so on, the people who actually run the world, but you should know something about paid work as a member of a democratic society, so that you can participate in good collective decision making. So I'm really, we've been taught that division of labor is the path to both social harmony and good efficiency, and I'm opposed to it in so many ways. I don't think families should have divisions of labor. Everybody should share in all of the labor. I don't think we should have gendered divisions of labor. So I think human beings are going to do best if everybody does some of everything, roughly speaking, and that does leave still a chance to focus in and develop expertise and special excellence in certain areas. But I'm, when I said earlier about we need to redefine excellence, we've come to believe that what you should do, whether you're an athlete or a CEO, is you should pick one little slice of something and do nothing but that thing, so you can be in the top 0.01% of the people who know how to do that thing. So you can be the very top of the hierarchy of status and income. And I think this is a kind of generally an inhuman relation to how we work together with other people and with the material world. It doesn't mean we don't want to acquire special skills and work hard at what we do, but I think that notion of expertise is a mistake. So just briefly on the role of the state. So in France, this shift to the 35-hour work week, which was the trade-off of wages for hours, was heavily state supported. So lots of tax incentives. It wasn't mandated exactly, but there were many forms of state incentives for companies to go along with this. And so that's another thing which we don't spend a lot of time talking about, but which would be a good thing to happen, is many different incentive structures. And of course, just to repeat what I said, I do think there are a whole set of forms of what can be called care, including health care, which of course includes abortion, which need to be state supported. They're just, that is basically how healthcare needs to be provided. Healthcare needs to be provided by the state, and formal care facilities for the elderly, for people with disabilities, for people with mental health problems, for children, all of that needs to be in place. I just don't think any of those things should be a substitute for the personal connections of care, both within families and within communities. So let me just say one more thing, which I haven't actually had a chance to say out loud here, which is I see one of the virtues of this path on the autonomy side is that everybody will have intimate relations with both children and the elderly. And those will not necessarily be biological, right? On this model, you don't have to have your own child to have an intimate relation with a child because you're taking care of your nephews and your nieces and the neighbor's toddler. And there's just a network of shared care, which means that everyone has the freedom not to have their own children if they don't want to. But that doesn't mean but the point of that is not that you're freed of care responsibilities. The point of that is that you, for whatever reason, you don't want to biologically have children, but because you do your care elsewhere. And in countries, of course, all over the world, people are traveling huge distances. Of course, that's always been true in North America. So people may be very far from where their parents are. But there will be elderly people down the block from them who they can help care for and know that their parents will have people down the block from them who can help care. So that I think the obligation to care stays throughout your life from sort of 3 to 95. And we'll get more and more creative about how to do that care. But it's not a substitute for the state, and the state is not a substitute for that. So I hope we'll be in touch more, because I really would like to, maybe you can put my email address up at some point. I'm really keen to hear about a labor union that is thinking about shorter work hours.
Oh, this is one of our main demands, really. We managed, actually, just if I have time, to make just a short, can I?
Yeah, if you can make it really quick, then yeah.
Okay, just really, really quickly. So after the big women's strike here, after the ban on abortion, there was a kind of consultative body that was created here. And one part of it was on labor. So a few women from our union, we joined this group, and we were working on demands that would be presented to the government that came out of the women's strike against the abortion ban. And our number one demand was shortening working time. And our second demand was increasing, kind of rebuilding the structures of care. So home care, not home care, child care, daycare, etc. So we're really set on this shortening working time. So yes, please, let's stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, yeah, I want to thank Jennifer for sharing this valuable insights on her book, and a special thanks to Meenakshi and Shraddha for their immensely useful comments on the book and on how to contextualize these arguments within the Indian scenario and its challenges. And as Prabha mentioned, so in our project Laws of Social Reproduction, we examine different forms of women's reproductive labor and the type of labor that are in many cases stigmatized. And I think the discussions today provides us with a lot of food for thought, as in how to, delve into the conversations within a country like India, which has a huge informal sector, and women occupy a significant portion in the informal labor force. With very little wage, very little or no time flexibility at all. And on the other hand, carry out a significant amount of unpaid care work in the private spaces. And also to understand how policymaking can be done to mitigate these challenges. So it was really amazing to listen to and talk about these topics. And last but not the least, we hold these seminars on the first Friday of every month. So please do join us in these fascinating conversations, and all our past events are available on our YouTube channel. So please do check them out. And yeah, thanks again, Jennifer, Meenakshi, and Shraddha. It was great having you all here. And thanks to all of you for joining us for today's seminar. Have a great weekend.
Thanks. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We had a good time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.